How's it going, everybody? This is Martin Stokes here.
And this is Dean Scurry.
And I am a traveller.
And I am a countryman.
Welcome to A Traveller
and a Countryman podcast.
What do you want to talk about? Because I can't think of anything.
So first of all, welcome to everybody here. Give yourselves a big round of applause. You turned up, well done. 10 o'clock in the morning podcast is a new thing in Ireland. That's amazing. I am blown away that me and Martin are sitting on a stage, and I'm blown away that the person we're sitting on the stage with is a woman. She's a woman from a working class community, and she's a senator, and she's my mate, and her name is Senator Lynn Ruane. Please give Lynn a big bill of boss. Now I can feel that energy. And we're doing it as part of a thing called the Ballymun Summit, which came from an idea that a few of us had. Shawnee Kinsler, myself, Paddy O'Reilly, Alan Kinsler, Ger Prendergast, about turning this community into the world's best community. We all know it is. The people living here know it's the world's best community, but sometimes we forget, and sometimes we listen to other people's bullshit that our community isn't the best in the world. Everything we need is in our community. Sometimes we think that we need to reach out to external people. We mightn't have the ideas or the money or the confidence or all that, but it's all within us. And that's why we set up the Health and Fitness Festival, because during lockdown, we were all going mental. And they told us we can't go into the parks, we can't go to the beaches, we can't do this. So we went online and we done an online festival. And that festival has grown over the last 2 years into a summit, into a podcast, into you guys turning up at 10 o'clock in the morning to have a conversation about where we're going as a society, as a community.
I told him, we laughed at there for a minute, right? Because you were saying we couldn't go to the beaches and we couldn't go to the parks. But actually, statistically, if you look at where all the fines were given out for those who broke the 5K, it was Ballymun was the highest.
Ballymun was the highest?
So we're going to beaches.
We were going to beaches. Hold on. They didn't want us to go to bleeding beaches. Yup, the beaches.
I think that was Dean's fault for bringing the bus loads out there.
Yeah.
So we're going to record this as well, record the audio, record the video, and let's see how it turns out. Myself and Martin have been doing a podcast for about 23 episodes, something like that, about 6 months, and this is our first live one. I'm really interested in where we can bring these types of conversations. Something is changing in our culture, in society in general. We're sitting down in a room like this and having conversations with people that we mightn't have listened to before is what we're interested in. Long format, as in more than like 5, 10, 15 minutes. Like this is like an hour and a half conversation. I think for a community like this to realise that those difficult conversations that we hid away in Ireland for the last 50, 100 years.
Like what, Dean? Are you saying, what are you saying about community is?
A working class community, let's put that kind of label on it. Yeah. You know what I mean? A community that has had the finger pointed at it for the last 50 years going, use that a problem in Ireland. It's kind of working class people and poverty and drugs, and you know, they done a documentary in this community about a year and a half ago called Crack in the Community. And that's the type of community I'm talking about. That's the image that's out there, but sometimes it's also in here. We hold on to that image, you know what I mean? And that's one of the reasons I'm invited Lynn along today, because she is working in legislation in the Senate to challenge those ideas, stereotypes, laws, and hopefully steer this country towards something that's a bit more interesting than finger pointing at working class people. So Lynn, welcome. Thank you. Thanks for taking the invitation. Thanks for turning up. With your fella. Thanks for being outside and just being normal and just talking to people. You were out there with me man, dad, and it was
sausages.
Having a sausages and a bit of white pudding. I shared a video of you going on a rant and screaming and shouting at people who didn't get you, who don't get this, who don't understand this, who for them this is a million miles away from them. And I've been in some of those communities. I remember walking in certain parts of the south side and feeling like I'm in fucking Narnia. You know what I mean? It was just alien to me. And I'm sure that this type of setup is alien to other people. It just so happens those other people are the people in power that own the businesses, that run the legal firms, that are judges. And we're kind of, I've always thought that we kind of serve some kind of role for them. If you go to the CCJ, which is the big court in town that everyone knows beside the Phoenix Park, I've noticed that there's a lot of us guys going through those systems and filling the wallets of people in those Narnia fucking lands.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the one on the poverty motion a few weeks ago. So in 2008, Ireland, the state, decided to close down the Combat Poverty Agency. And as some of you will remember, and I know we've some young people here from the schools today, so their memory might be not as probably prominent as some of the rest of us around 2008 in relation to the economic crash. As investment, so people that lived in poverty before crashes, after crashes, during crashes. It just looks a little different at each time, you know. But in 2008, the state decided to close the Combat Poverty Agency, which was the only independent agency that had like a remit and oversight to look at what poverty was like in Ireland, to measure poverty, to look at how we address poverty, to be able to look at legislation in terms of how legislation will compound poverty, how policies compound poverty. And they closed that during a time where working class communities were going to begin to I suppose, feel the full brunt of austerity above and beyond any other community. So as they decided to close down the Combat Poverty Agency, they also began to de-invest in the services that had been invested in over a few years. And those services often ran on very little. So it's not that they had huge tranches of funding to work from. I worked for Bluebell Addiction Advisory Group at the time. I developed and ran the drug services in Bluebell. So the budget there was only my salary and some small program costs. Like, it wasn't huge, but we done a lot with the small amount of funding that we did. And we worked with other agencies in the community, and we worked with volunteers, pretty much like, you know, what yous are doing this weekend, relying on the goodwill and heart and compassion of everybody that cares to do the work. But the state began to erode away the small bit of money that was invested in services, and at the same time close down the body that had oversight on poverty. So it's very strategized, you know. So if you don't have the independent body calling that out and you're doing the two things at once, you know, then it relied on communities to try and advocate for themselves and stand up for themselves.
And did they do that under the austerity kind of banner? They said, here's an opportunity to pull the rug here.
Basically, I think it was Varadkar is quoted, of course it's Varadkar, was quoted saying they've basically closed another pointless quango. Do you know what I mean? But it was like far from pointless. It was the only body doing this type of work around poverty. So a few weeks ago, I decided to do a motion to try and look at reinstating the Combat Poverty Agency. Now, there was lots of other asks in that motion as well in terms of what the combat poverty, you know, all these years on, we don't need the exact same combat poverty, the same concept, but we might need it to be obviously much more robust now when we've...
So a motion is kind of a thing that you bring up in the Senate where you work as an independent senator.
So it's not legislation. So a motion really is you're calling out the principle of something and you're trying to read the room, really. So you're not really sure how other people may feel about the motion. Has the government got a view on it? So really you do the motion and it's a set of ideals and values and proposals, and you see who is actually on board with it. And then the next step from that would be that I would try and introduce some of the things within the motion, where legislation obviously is much more binding. A motion is much more putting the fields out as to see, like, do people agree that this is a step forward? But what I spoke about when speaking about the motion on poverty really was that poverty is profitable. And that's what you're talking about there when you're going to the courts and you're looking at, well, who benefits from poverty? So we in our communities sometimes wouldn't even consider ourselves as living in poverty because we've only ever had a certain amount of means. We've been resourceful with them. We look after each other. We mind each other. We focus on trying to flourish as best we can within the environments that we're in. It's only when you're in the halls of power or you are where power is concentrated that you realise the disparity between those two things. In some sense, it's actually quite depressing to begin to realise the disparity. Like, a part of me always going, why didn't I just stay where I was in Killinarden?
It looks like you were just about to go fuck this, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Yous are all bleeding mad jokes.
Yeah, well, I'm close to that. That's the thing, because the problem is, I think politicians, even though there's some goodwill there, I sometimes think that they've convinced themselves that I'm exaggerating or something. You know, I'm kind of getting the feel that it's like, oh, is Lynn talking about poverty again? Oh, is she on about that class thing again? Is she ever going to have a new issue to kind of go on about? And it's kind of like, well, until them things are solved, I'm going to have to keep reminding you that this is the reality.
And sometimes we don't feel like we have the words or the confidence or the right to stand up. And like I done something with Martin we done 2 or 3 of these things. I call them a human rights picket. Okay, and the reason we call it a human rights picket is because the travelling community in this country are not even seen as human yet.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And there's a group of people who have rights, and then there's a picket. So there's 3 different things there. And the picket is, if you've ever gone to, say, where was the one that was in town? Debenhams. The Debenhams workers were striking and they were outside and there was a bit of a picket. And you know in your heart, as soon as you see a picket, you don't cross it. So we held a picket at the Dublin City Council Super Depot, which is just getting built over there, which is like €1 million project right beside where Martins lives. €1 billion was spent in this community in the regeneration, and where he lives got nothing out of any of that.
Well, it was because the reality was, again, poverty. Back to the one thing, accommodation issues, where, as Dean said, we talked about it for a couple of times actually, and there was absolutely no recognition at all whatsoever of where we live or who we are. And we sort of raised that a little bit on the podcast also. But yeah, as soon as we did do the pickets, we done like 3 of them. And yeah, it did bring attention to where we were living. Did
people cross the picket?
No, people didn't cross the picket. Yeah. We have to say there was young lads there who, the odd 1 or 2, needed a couple of tools. And we sort of didn't want to be tough on them because we knew it wasn't down to the people that was working there. Obviously, they had families to look after as well and feed and take care of bills to pay. So we were, if you like, on the good side of them, basically. We explained the situation and they fully understood. But the biggest problem was Dublin City Council themselves. Is
where the power concentrates, and that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, and they wouldn't show no recognition at all about, like, literally ourselves on that site up there. And now they have us surrounded with that big super depot. This is costing them over something like 120, 130 million euros to build.
So we put a picket on it, and it cost them 100 and odd grand a day to not open it. So within about 3 hours, they realised we're in a position here where this community is using the leverage of the amount of money that we're spending against us. They didn't
want to spend money on let's say things that needed spending on, if you like. They had no problem on letting the money go down the drain. That's where workers weren't literally getting paid. Well, obviously they were getting paid, but they had to sort that problem out, like,
when you think of that type of cost, and then you look at the living conditions for some of the travelling community on sites, even the contamination of dirty water. I mean, there's nowhere in the developed world where we leave living conditions in a sense that even the water is contaminated.
There's some travellers that just live up at the NCT centre, and I've put photographs up of where their electrical wires are basically from 4 trailers are going into one box. It's all open, it's all exposed, and the dirty water out of the house, the grey water, goes into a ditch and then just comes back out and runs all over the site. It's an interesting reality once you go in there.
It is. It's interesting, Dean, for people that don't know about these things. Yeah. But the fact that people are living like this for years and years and years, and it's not just on one corner, it's in almost all corners of Ireland. Now, don't get me wrong, I know I'm not just throwing the sympathy card here for travellers, because I do know there's a lot of settled community also that have hardships in life, like, you know what I mean? And have all sort of, as you call them, like the downers, if you like. And where Dublin City Council or whatever councils are over them are not listening to them also. And that's why probably the country's gone in such a bad state that it is. Because they don't want to, like Lynn said earlier on there, which brings up this issue about poverty. And they're thinking, is Lynn going to start talking about poverty again? Yeah. Of course she's going to start talking about poverty again. Because poverty hasn't gone away. It's there, and it's in all parts of Ireland. And it's not just in the travelling community. It's simple as, and the more they push it away, the longer it's going to take to fix. And to keep pushing it away, it's never going to be fixed. There's always going to be a problem.
And what Lynn
And a
is
lot of
saying
people like myself think this present moment that Ireland is probably in a worse state now than what it has ever been. I'm not a politician, but I have eyes. I can
But
see a
that's
lot.
from our perspective. And what Lynn is saying is these lads have sussed out how to turn that into a business.
As always, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Only from our perspective do we see it saying that's a load of bollocks.
But even when you hear it in the chamber, even the people that are on your side on the conversation, and then you hear them talk about poverty, and you're kind of going, oh, they're on my side. But what on earth is that they're saying? Because like one turned around and said, we were talking about poverty, and we were talking about really entrenched poverty, where it completely controls your whole life, your whole existence, your whole future. And one politician got up and said, oh yeah, well my mum and dad had to work 2 part-time jobs, but we owned a farm and some land. Yeah, we were in poverty as well. And we're like, I was like...
He owned a farm and he had 2 jobs. Gee,
I know.
I'd love to live in that kind of poverty.
That's what I went...
Give it over, man. Travellers have laden trailers and all. High aces and trailers. Travellers have a handy in this country. Give it
But
over.
that's
If you're
exactly
talking
it.
to them again, would you ask them to swap spaces with
That's
me,
what I
please?
was going to do. I always like
If you
that.
don't
I'm
mind.
like, oh God, if only we could swap, because then Senator Eileen Flynn kind of came in after her, which was brilliant. And she spoke about her home family having to sit around a candle for heat. And it kind of put it straight in perspective back,
Yeah.
And that's why it's important that there is people with those experiences in the chamber, because they can't talk in a vacuum about poverty in such light kind of, poverty washed ways. Do you know what I mean? Like, so rural poverty as well is very different to urban poverty. You know what I mean? So there is distinctions as well between, but yeah, a farm and 2 jobs. But there you go.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I was slagging off travellers
God
there
bless
as
them.
you were saying that. I was saying travellers have high aces and caravans and all coming out of bleeding arse. They're minted.
Yeah.
They're not paying tax. They're not paying for the electricity.
A guard stopped me one time and asked me, where did you get this fan? I said, I'm 20 years saving for it, I said, I have a big family, so I actually need this fan, so I've struggled to get it. But in all honesty, he was genuinely begrudging the van that I drove. He said, it's a nice fan, how did you get the price of it? So I'll tell you what I'll do with you, I said, I'll give you the keys in the logbook, so you want to give me the keys to your house. So, because your house will buy 10 of these vans.
Very good, yeah.
With all due respect.
Lynn mentioned a woman's name there, Eileen Flynn, who's also a senator. She's also a traveller. It's for me, that blows my mind. It shouldn't. It should be just a norm. It should be just a norm that there's, Martin's doing a podcast, but this isn't the norm. These kind of conversations are not normal, and that's why we're doing the podcast. One is to show the differences, between, say, settled communities and travelling communities, but then also to show that we're all the bleeding same. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean? We all put our head in the same pillow.
And where do you think this all comes from, Dean?
What do you mean?
Do you think it comes from the public, or not say the higher people? Are they the cause of this dividance between certain people? Do you think it's coming from? I don't think it comes from the public anyway, personally.
Well, I don't think. So let's say
All these lovely people
there's
here
settled
today.
the settled people in this community. I don't think that they came up with the divide and conquer strategy.
No, I don't. I was just saying to Lynn earlier on, and out the back here, I said Ballymun is a lovely community, and there is some lovely people. And I know literally hundreds of people in Ballymun. Absolutely.
Well, you're a Ballymunner.
I've never personally, experienced anything bad in Ballymun, and I can honestly say that, in the line of dividance or discrimination or stuff like that.
From your peers,
absolutely
yeah.
not.
See, we don't control the size of the cake, right? So the problem is the reason why people conquer and divide, it's because they haven't got enough, right? So they purposely shrink the size of they shrink the size of the resources. They shrink the size of, who can have access to what housing. They shrink the size. The pie just keeps getting smaller. So people from a state level.
Yeah, that's right.
So people end up being pitted against each other because of how things are distributed.
Yeah.
Because then we think that the person who we once loved is now in competition with us for the thing that we need, that one job that's going over there, or that place in that school, or that person's on social welfare, but I'm pretty sure she has her fella living with her and I'm over here struggling, and we start getting pitted against each other.
Yes.
And I think that's just because we're living on so little that we begin to see it's the same narrative that's happening with migrants. It's like, this idea, house the Irish first, and it's like, well, you weren't housing the Irish then either. It's not anything got to do with migrants.
No.
But the messaging at this level is telling us that we have somebody to compete with. And it's divide and conquer, because if we're against each other, if we're against each other, we're less powerful. Because if we were together, we outnumber them. And if we all learn that we outnumber them and that our sames are the same and we don't listen to the differences that they put on us, that actually we could overthrow that in a second. You know, but they're too busy putting us together.
That's right.
But we feed into that. We feed into that as a distraction. We listen to that. So the onus is a little bit on us as well. What do we listen to? What conversations do we have? You know what I mean? So we can say that they are the baddies, but we have a part to play. We have a part to realise what we listen to, what we put in our ears, and the conversations we have point us in a certain direction in our lives.
Similar thing happened to us on, we had a big meeting with Dublin City Council. There was a lot of people there. Basically, they just sat back, let us do all the talking and all the fighting. What you're saying now, they pit us against each other. And you've seen that thing. And we did.
Genius.
We genuinely fought with each other. Words like, yeah. And they were just sitting there behind the lovely tables that we set up for them to have this meeting, yeah. And they never said a word. And the fact that we were actually being nice to them, they were on our sides. So then we sort of came to the conclusion, look, nice is no good here. To have us fighting here against each other, which genuinely did happen. So the following meeting we had then, you might say we pulled a few different tactics, if you like, but we were being serious about it. And we fought with the council then. And we gave them, said what we felt we needed to say to them, then they start listening. And also, we gave them time to talk, but again, they were saying very little words, because their tactic was, we'll just agree with everything they have to say, and everybody's happy. So we'll tell them what they want to hear. Again, everybody is happy.
It's called pouring honey in your ear.
So now we're friends now, we've no need to fight.
Exactly. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head for some of the stuff that I experience and saying that where I am, because what I have found is that the people with power now realise that raw power is not enough to win over everybody. So they've manufactured emotional responses and they've manufactured compassion. So it's not real compassion. They've learned a language. So now they will say the right things. They will use the right names for the traveller community, for working class communities. They'll use the right names for LGBTQ plus people. And so they learn all this language, but it's now being used as a form of power to make us feel like they're getting on with us and they're starting to understand us.
That's right.
But yet the legislation and the decision making remains the same. But their front-facing, how they engage with us is coming across as more empathetic. So you're kind of going, you actually agree with me. But then they go away and still make the same decision that's
that's right.
violent in its nature in terms of like policy. So it is that like they'll appear to get on with you in the room, so you kind of leave a bit confused.
So in this community, during their regeneration, which cost €1 billion, they employed Ireland's top neuro-linguistic programmer to train up the interface staff, the staff that you meet when you go to ring them up and go about your rent or the boilers broke or something like that. They train them in a thing called neuro-linguistic programming. So you know when you go into them and you end up walking out thinking that you've done something wrong, yeah? That's kind of what it is, and you're fighting against each other, and you're going home and you're bringing that back to the kitchen table, and you're going, oh, these bastards, I just don't want to go down there anymore. That's what they do. They pour honey in your ear, they shake you a little bit, they go, you shouldn't really be here, and they push you out the door. And they've done that with the travellers for years. It's genius. When the day he realised
they're still doing it,
they're pouring honey in their ears, he went, oh, I get it now. And then we done a human rights picket, and we locked down their super depot at a cost of 100 odd grand a day. And within 3 hours, the chief executive of the Dublin City Council rang us and going, what do you want? We have it here. There's no expense spared now today.
They literally begged us for a meeting, whereas first it was the opposite way around. Now I'm not saying they've done a big, great, genius job either. Like, you know what I mean? We're still fighting with them for certain.
For 40 years they've been pouring money in your ears. Not just you. I'm saying, like in this community as well. We were the poster child for having honey poured in your ears. Where do you think that €1 billion went to? There's no way that 20% of all the homeless people in this city came from Ballymun and that the money stayed in this community. None of us own the property here. Very few of us. 70% of people in this community rent, 30% own. I'm going to challenge this community and Dublin City Council in a meeting later on at 4 o'clock called The Elephant in the Room, which is the big conversation, that we go from 70% rent to 70% ownership in 5 years, then we have leverage. Then we have a conversation that's worth having.
Where there's a problem with, as far as I can see, any of my experiences, with governments or councils, and you sit back and do nothing, they will never, never, never fix the problem. They will never approach you and ask you what the problem is until you go to them and tell them what the problem is, and they still won't do anything about it until you're nothing short of fighting with them.
You're the fucking problem.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're the problem.
Yeah.
Martin, you traveller.
Absolutely.
You Pavy. Whatever.
Thank
fucking
you,
word
Dean. I
want
like
to come
that. It gives me strength.
Give me strength. Ah. So you stand up in front of the Senate and you fill the room and you talk about poverty, and a little video goes out and people share it and the bleeding blood vessels are burning up, and in the back of your head you're going, I'm passionate about this, but one leg is out the fucking door. I would love you to stay there, but I've had a conversation with you. Lynn needs to mind Lynn. Dean needs to mind Dean. Martin needs to mind me. You need to be kind to each other. There are fights to be had, but we can't end up in a bleeding room with a rope around our neck just to have a fight. You know what I mean? What I'm suggesting as a society, as a culture, as working class people, is that we are aware of that, we have that conversation, and we support each other, and we don't just let certain people go out onto the edge of the cliff and bring up the thing that we all know we should talk about, while the rest of us are sitting back listening to bleeding Bob Marley and smoking spliffs.
I miss sitting back to Bob Marley and smoking spliffs. I'm all for that.
So talking about Bob Marley and spliffs, you're part of a group of people who are looking at what's called decrim.
Yes.
And in the papers the other day, Gino was looking at is decrim or legalization for 7 grams of weed, yeah, which is a conversation that we're having in this country. Now, I've said those words to people in this community who work in a kind of community sector, and they kind of shriek and pull back and go, decrim, what's that? It's 2020 bleeding too. Decrim is if that young one over there has enough weed in her pocket for a joint and she gets pulled over by a copper, she's not a criminal. She's just a young woman who has a bit of weed in her pocket. And we just spread that out across other things, across other drugs.
Yeah, well, I'll explain for maybe people that don't know the distinction, and it's because I don't even think yet some politicians or media have grasped the different distinctions. So if you just give me a moment, I'll talk about decrim, but maybe just give a context to the differences between the two. So decriminalisation is basically the decriminalising of the person, right? It's not legalisation of the drug. So you're decriminalising the individual for having a quantity of drugs in their pocket that would reach a certain measurement, right? So it would be one that would constitute personal use, and that would be any drug. Legalisation is when it becomes where you can buy it, it's sold in shops, you fully legalise. So there's a big conversation in Ireland around legalising marijuana, right? And it gets confused then, I suppose, with the conversation around decriminalising drugs, right? And that's the kind of two conversations that are happening parallel. So even though I fully support the legalisation of marijuana, I don't generally, you won't hear me talking about that as much, because I feel that only focusing on that falls foul of another middle class argument on drugs, because so many people from different classes all smoke marijuana. You're most likely to get that one true. But if you look at communities that have been completely decimated by crack cocaine and heroin, why are they still criminals? Because that's an outcome of poverty. That is an outcome of trauma. That is self-medication. If you're using that many drugs to oblivion, right, where you're using drugs to survive your life, I mean, that's no way we want anyone to live. And because so many people have experienced that, some people are afraid of the conversation on decrim because they've watched their loved ones die, they've watched their friends, they've watched what it does. So they think that decriminalising, or they're afraid that decriminalising somehow says that that's okay. That's okay if you're on heroin. That's okay if your life is controlled in this way. But that's not what's being said. What's being said is that that person shouldn't be on front of a judge for their heroin addiction, cocaine addiction, crack addiction, weed use, whatever it may be. That they should be on front of a professional that can help, that it's health-led. you know, and that's all that decriminalisation is about. But I do understand the community workers and parents and being afraid because their lives have been destroyed. But if we only look at marijuana, I think we forget the most vulnerable drug users, and those are the ones that are living on our streets, that are, you know, addicted to benzodiazepine, that the ones that we care about the most will be lost if we only look at marijuana and cannabis. We need to actually look at decriminalisation of drugs as a whole, and we need to invest. And that's so if you look at the profit of poverty, you look at the amount of jobs created from heroin use, crack cocaine use in the country, from homeless services to legal aid, you know, the amount of money it takes to put somebody through court and on probation for one score bag of gear in their pocket. Imagine you had have invested that money in that individual, in their treatment, in their education, whatever. And you can't force people into treatment either. So it has to be something obviously that they want, and they will at some stage. It's just at what point that is. But imagine the money that it takes to police people was actually invested in people in terms of their health, their conditions, their housing, and that's what decrim is about for me. The legalisation one is a different one, and that's about being able to freely buy in shops and stuff.
You understand all that? Fairly well done. So there's a few bits off that. One is sometimes the decrim legalisation thing for me is kind of like the abortion conversation, that it's going to be a free for all, that we don't have our shit enough together to have this legislation in because we'll just go off and it'll be a mad one. You know what I mean? And then also that the Crack in the Community documentary was really interesting, because if you done cocaine in Cabinteely, you would see more in terms of the amount of transactions and the amount of money being made in the same time period. You know what I mean? But we're told that there's so much money being made on the streets in Ballymun. The great thing about Ballymun is that we don't have the money to hide behind walls and legislation. Or litigation, which is, you know, bringing people to court for defaming. Is that it? Like, Ballymun has been defamed in public and on the radios for 50 years. We should, as a community, be able to bring RTE, for example, to court for defaming us. But we don't have that in our heads. We don't have that money. So that's why they can do an undercover series in Ballymun about crack cocaine. But they don't do it in their community about their drug, the one that they're all on. I know there's lads and girls in here that have been in addiction recovery and been in prison. Yeah, prison is, let's say, 100 grand a year. Yeah. The Rutland is 25 grand. You know what I mean? So let's do the maths on it. Put someone in prison for 5 years, or do loads of Rutlands, loads of treatments, loads of that type of stuff. There's money in addiction, there's money in poverty. And we brought it up with Peter McFerry. I said to Peter, your organisation is massive. There's loads of people in there paying their mortgages on the wages that you give them. What happens if we solve homelessness? Do all those people are out of a job? And so you just expand that across drug services, homeless services, da.
Exactly. And I think, unfortunately, even those who do care ultimately end up protecting the industry and reinforcing and compounding that industry. You know, I remember my therapist saying to me when I was younger, your job is only done when you're not needed anymore. And I remember, I don't know whether he was telling me I still needed to stay in therapy. I just said, yeah, I was like, okay. But for me then, I now look at everybody and I'm kind of going, well, who's trying to do themselves out of a job? Do you know what I mean? But then you look, and nobody is actually. So if I look at CEOs, say, of all the big NGOs, the ones that are talking about like combating poverty, ending this, ending that, and all these years later, they're still middle class people running those organisations. I don't get it. So if you look in communities, if you look at the South Dublin partnerships and the inner city partnerships, and you look at all these different community organisations, are all the hierarchies are still buying in middle class people to run those organisations. And I don't think then that makes any sense, because if we were doing our jobs properly, people in communities would be doing the jobs in the communities. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the expertise is here. It's in the room.
But it was our expertise that set them up. like community services, youth services. You know, they were running out of shacks and fields in Tala. They were running out of porta cabins. They were setting the boards up. Women were running everything. They were setting up summer projects. They were setting up bingo on a Wednesday. Like, that's all community development. And then somebody came in and said, oh, this looks interesting. Let's push all them out. Let's professionalise it. And let's mainstream it. And let's now say that you have to have a degree to do what you've been doing forever.
Because that degree keeps you out of bleeding conversation. Yeah. Because your kind don't do degrees. People like us, as a reference to your book, don't do degrees. Because we do crack. And we do sitting in the bleeding booze all morning, noon and night, putting bets on. That's what we do. But if we want to change that, we have to change that. If we want to be a community that stops finger pointing, stops blaming ourselves, stops fighting amongst ourselves, stops expecting other people's expertise to pull us up, okay? If we want to do that, we put on a bleeding summit.
So what is it that stops all that? Who steps up against them to stop all this stuff?
We're doing it.
Who steps up against them to stop everything that's gone wrong?
We're doing it. You're in it. This is it. It doesn't get any more.
We're in a room here talking about it now. Does it go any further? Or do we go out in the streets? Or do we knock on doors? Do we shame the people that's responsible for all of these things?
I don't know if shaming, because
Martin, I don't know if he told you, but this is your lunch. You're running in the local elections 2020.
Yeah. That's good. I don't mind. I'll give it a shot.
We've just launched Martin Stokes' campaign, lads.
Anyway, Martin Stokes, I've got all the strokes.
I think at times we can talk forever about certain things, and not doing anything about it is where the problem is never solved.
Yeah. So I had a conversation with
and
you
also
about the shaming thing.
I also think it takes, of course, it can start off with one person. The first step is probably the important step, but I think we do need people to stand behind and go forward and bring out the people that's responsible for all the downfalls in this country.
So we do need a little bit of that, and I think we need a little bit of what I'm going to suggest now in a second, okay? Because we can shame them. Me and Bernie and Lynn and loads of other people, me ma, have stood outside the Dáil and shame on you, okay? That is like, for me, it's like candy floss. It doesn't do anything other than give us an emotional release. You know what I mean? We get our little bit of tension and anger out, and then we go off to the pub, have a pint or two, and go home, pat ourselves on the back and say, well done.
When I first got elected, because obviously protest and people power is something that I've always believed in and still continue to believe in. But I remember being extremely sad when I was an elected representative and I was inside, and I had to come out of LH2000, which is one part of the Oireachtas, and walk around the front doors and into where the chamber is. And I could hear some chanting from the street. So like, I remember asking as I was going to the chamber, because I had to go to vote, going, what protest is outside? And nobody knew. And I remember realising, oh my God, like nobody actually in here, in this, it's like, we're completely locked in here and nobody could tell me what the protest was outside. So I would have to then come out of the chamber, go out and see what protest is outside. But the fact is, I remember being really sad because I remember the energy that it would give you to be outside, to feeling like you're being heard, to taking a stand, to, you know, having your banners ready and bringing your community projects with you. And that still all has purpose. And that's why we also need to make sure we're having disruptive politics as well, like, you know, so the protest is important for morale, but it's like the picket. We also need to disrupt the business of the day. Like, you need to have to make people stop in their jobs and not be able to work, you know, and I think that's why the picket is a good example of that, and I think we need to do more disruptive protests.
Does that mean bringing the protests into their conference rooms? Yeah.
Yeah, anything that disrupts the work of the day, because when I realised that they're all going about their business in there and none of them even know what's going on outside, I was like, oh shit.
Like years ago, I went down to Dublin City Council. Yeah, a bit of an issue with them. It was about 20 years ago. Yeah, and there was some problem anyway. I'm not going to go into the details about it, but it wasn't being sorted. So I went down to the council office and I went in the doors and I went straight up to the conference room. I asked the security guard, when is your next meeting in here? He said, you can't go in there, he said, because there's like around 2-3 o'clock, he said, today, there's a meeting in there. Well, I said, tell them I'm making this my home. I said, tell them my problem is sorted out. And by 3 o'clock that day, by 2 o'clock, the meeting was at 3. By 2 o'clock on that particular day, the situation, the problem that I had with Dublin City Council, again, they sorted it out by 2 o'clock, so they had an hour to get all their staff into that meeting there and continue doing their whatever they do best in there for themselves. So one way of doing it is bringing yourself into the building, never mind outside it.
Yeah, and sometimes...
You might be intruding, but I tell you, it makes good results.
Absolutely, and businesses do it all the time.
Like she said there, she didn't even know what was going on from the inside of that wall, and we had a protest outside it, and it's not even talked about, which means it didn't bother them for starters, and there wasn't a bit of interest of what was going on outside that wall, because you're warden in their room, again, causing disruption.
And businesses do it all the time. In the tech business, disruptiveness is what they do. You know what I mean? Elon Musk is just after doing a buying Twitter and sacking everybody, or you know what I mean? All that type of stuff. That's what they do. And this isn't a Kick the Dublin City Council podcast, but they are in that position. They make the rules. They don't always follow their own rules. Actually, they try and avoid the rules, but they make the rules. They have the power, but they don't generally necessarily have all the responsibility. A few examples of how that worked for me in this community is during the regeneration, there was like 14 families over in Balcurris. Do you remember you used to be able to buy drugs in Balcurris in the flats? So there was families living in that, and they were like, Dean, what do? We can't bring our kids up like this. And I said, well, what do you want? They said, we want houses. I said, when do you want them? They said, now. I said, okay, well, what I advise is that you get all your kids and your dogs and your babies and your husbands, and you all camp out in the foyer of the civic offices until you get what you want. And 7 days later, there was 14 houses appeared out of nowhere. And a few years later after that, after the financial crash, me and about 40 other people decided, as a country, we're at the being handed a debt of, I don't know what it is now, it's probably 200 billion euro. The Irish portion of the European and global banking debt is probably about 200 billion euro with interest. So we kind of seen that happening, and we camped outside the central bank for 6 months, October, November, December, January, February, March. They kicked us out on Paddy's Day, just the night before Paddy's Day. And then a few years later, I convinced a few people, including Lynn, to walk into a 10-storey building with me and have a look at how can we take maybe 100 vulnerable people off the streets. So that type of stuff is disruptive, but it can also leave you in a place that me and Lynn know really well, where you just want to sit in a dark room and cry your eyes out and go, why isn't the world the way I want it to be? As a community, we just need to be there, support each other, have a think about it, use our emotions, but also use our intelligence, have the conversations that we think are difficult to have, and by having them, we kind of unravel them. If we just want to point a finger and shame the government and shout outside the door, that has a certain level of result. If we want to organise in our community, if we want to join a union, if we want to set up a group or run for election, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
Interesting, yeah. Okay. So that's the story with Dublin City Council now and the governments, and still nothing happening.
So Lynn, how are you, lovey?
I don't know, I feel like we should all walk over to the building and just go in.
Yeah. Let's occupy.
Why not?
How are you doing, Lynn?
I'm good, yeah.
Have you got feedback from people about the videos that you put up?
Yeah, it's the last one was, do you know what, it was, so I'm at the stage now where I went in and I give speeches, and sometimes I write notes and stick to them when I'm trying not to like cry, right? So there's like different versions, and there's nothing I do in there that's not actually separate from my lived reality and the lived reality of my friends. And like, I refuse to move out of Killinarden, and I think there's a part of me that is too guilt ridden to go anywhere. I need to stay in the just in the embrace of everyone else's struggle. Like, so I've all this like internal stuff that I'm trying to work out. Like, am I allowed to be happy? But like, oh God,
you were posting up pictures of you at the Bleeding Burning Man Festival and Bleeding a Desert in America with your fella raving. Yuppa!
Yeah, but that's different. That's a festival. Yeah, but there's all I when I'm in there and I'm talking about stuff, I am getting positive feedback, but there's also fear as well attached to some of it, because the louder I get, the louder the kind of, not the politicians in the room actually, but that further right-wing element is getting, in terms of trying to frame who I am. So like most recently what I found, I haven't publicly spoke about this before, but it was based on that speech, but, Gripped magazine decided to write a piece that like took random little pieces from different articles that I said and put them together to try and make it look like that I look down on my own community and that's the only work that I do. And I found that very scary. I found that extremely scary. There was a line they took from one article where it said, I earn more money now than I ever did before. And they put that into an article as if I was gloating. But actually, if you go and look at the article, and what it said is, now that I earn more money than I have before, I realise how much power that you can get when you access a higher wage and being able to pay for like grinds and education. So that's a different sentence. That's me going, it's not okay that now just because I have a bit of an extra income that I can invest more in terms of getting my daughter through her leaving cert than her friend might be able to in the school beside her, in the class beside her. So that was my point. But they took that line and they took another line and they took another line and they put them all together in one article. And I remember I just sat in the bed for the weekend, absolutely distraught, because I was like, whatever about people who are in opposition to me hating me, people that don't know me hating me, the thoughts of an effort to turn my own tribe that know that I'm trying to advocate for against me, that frightened me. So there's like this, whatever about the positive stuff that comes at you and you're trying to hang on to that, the louder you get, the louder the pushback. The louder you get, the louder you push back. So sometimes I get loud and then sometimes I just want to go home and go, oh God, what am I doing? You could just be living a much easier life and da-da-da-da-da. And then I have to come out again and I have to come out again. So that's the kind of conflict that I'm in at the minute is I need to keep going and not be silenced by quite sinister elements and agendas, you know, because...
Are there agendas? So, you know, in the world we have left wing and right wing. There are publications out there, whether they're radio stations or websites or magazines or newspapers that have kind of a political agenda, political ideology, yeah? And one of them that Lynn mentioned there is Gripped, but there are other ones that are left-wing. And so do you think that their motivation is to strip your character down, to assassinate you, or is it for clicks and likes and profit? And you're just a tool for them to get to that?
I think mainstream media is clicks and likes and profit. I think that's more of a political agenda driven to. So if you have a loud, credible voice that's in complete opposition to everything you stand for, and you're mobilised, you have to remember that some of those more right wing elements, they also want to infiltrate communities like this where people are worn out, people are like they don't care
people
about...
are divided and conquered.
Yeah. So the likes of people that are involved in like the National Party and all these parties, right? They'll come into working class communities and they'll say, yeah, we know what you're going through and you're angry at the government and we're angry at the government and, you know, and they're going exactly for the type of people who are already disenfranchised, that already don't trust politics, and they're going to try and pull that together. And then you've me that's in politics, right? And is trying to do that, but is also talking to the same audience that they're trying to infiltrate. So I think it was an attempt to try and strip my character so that they don't trust me and what message I'm putting out, so that they will continue to be disenfranchised, that they will move more and more into thinking that, you know, working class communities are in competition with travellers, with migrant people, with whatever it may be. And it's that the longer we're eating ourselves up. Where when I'm in the chamber, anyone that has them type of views, if I'm in there talking about child poverty, if I'm in there talking about one parent family households, if I'm in there talking about, you know, the poverty agency, if I'm in there talking about spent convictions, none of them have ever backed any of those things. But yet, they'll come into communities that are affected by those things and try and recruit them under that agenda. But you'll never see any of them that support that messaging in politics ever fight against child poverty, ever.
And one of them is in the community that you're in, which is the Church of Scientology.
Yes.
The Church of Scientology is in Tallaght, okay? And they have kind of these drug booklets that they hand out to working class people in Tallaght. But part of the way I see it is that they're using it as a recruitment tool. You know what I mean? And I remember being at Ballymun with my girlfriend, like I think it was 2 years ago. It was like 98 years Michael Collins was shot there. And it was Ballymun is where Michael Collins was shot, yeah, down in Cork. And I went out with my girlfriend because, you know, we're into kind of community and socialism and a bit of probably Sinn Féin-y stuff and all that, you know what I mean? So we went down there and we were standing there and the Nationalist Party were up on the podium. And your man was saying all the right stuff, but about half an hour into it went, yeah, and the blacks are this. And my girlfriend went, my mate's black. And then the refugees are this. You know what I mean? So after they had poured honey into everyone's ears, the Dublin City Council strategy, poured honey into everyone's ears for a half an hour and waved the flags and wore the T-shirt, then they said their real agenda, okay? So what we're saying is, sometimes when I'm being assassinated or travellers are being assassinated or Lynn's being assassinated online, it's part of a game. You know what I mean? When I was accused of spending €150,000 on myself from Apollo House, it's because I'm fucking disrupting shit up and I'm fucking games up and I'm taking money out of really wealthy people's pockets, okay? So just from your perspective, just keep your eyes on it. Without getting too heavy in it, we'll carry a lot of the heaviness. You can, as a normal member of society who's not generally, a politician or an activist or something like that, just keep your eyes open. That's kind of it. And you can get lost in that game because part of when I done the Apollo House stuff, I was left in a room basically wanting to bleed and kill myself. And then I realised, mind yourself, start being kind to yourself, start going off and spending time with yourself, going swimming, doing yoga, doing jiu-jitsu and being nice to yourself. And the whole world is not on your shoulders, Lynn. The whole world is not on your shoulders, Martin. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you ring me and go, I just feel like the whole of the fucking thing is up here.
Yeah, it does feel like that sometimes. Even when we started off, I know I'm going back to the one thing about that Dublin City Council thing, but there's a lot to talk about, but not today. And yes, for about 2 solid months, completely drained the life out of me, stressed me out to the 99s. Had to knock off my phone, had to knock off everything, stop going around people, stop everything completely, just to get me head just back to some... I'll never be normal, but just to get back somewhere normal.
So one of the reasons I'm doing this is to kind of... We can get bogged down in that, and you can feel the energy in the room already. It kind of goes down like that. One of the reasons I'm doing this, or I'm part of doing this, is solutions, is taking leadership roles. So in terms of what you're doing in decrim and in poverty, because we can set the scene and say how it is, but what's the solutions? Where do we go? What are we doing?
Yeah, well, but I suppose it's everybody is doing something different as well. So obviously my legislative priorities are that we have spent convictions legislation, that we have, decriminalised drugs, that we're moving more towards a humane society that realises that you can't police your way out of poverty and you can't police your way out of a housing crisis, so it's about just moving to a society where power is somewhat dismantled and distribution is much more equal and people so you could in my ideal society, right? And my young one actually kind of made it very clear for me. She was about 7, 8, my youngest girl, and she said to me, Mad, you know what? I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to drive an ice cream van and own a load of cats. Right? And there was me trying to slog through Trinity, thinking I'm going to change the generational trend. And I'm looking going, you're going to what? You're going to drive an ice cream van?
I love it. That Why did I fucking go for that one?
That either means you like ice cream or you're a drug dealer. I don't know.
Yeah. Shh, don't tell them. In Ballymun there's loads of ice cream vans.
So so I was kind of I was a bit going, Jesus, I know she's only 7, but I hope she does go to college. And I was like, why would you do that? And to think of it coming from a 7-year-old, she said, well, I'm choosing that. I would be choosing that. And I just thought that is the most profound thing that this child could ever say to me, because in a society, it's not about everyone has to be tech industry or everyone has to be a CEO or everybody has to be earning millions and billions of money, right? It's about being able to live a life where you choose what the thing is that you're going to do. So if you're going to work in a shop, if you're going to be a hairdresser, if you want to be a makeup artist, or you want to be a midwife, or you want to be a scientist, that you're making that decision based on you could do any of those things and you have the access to do any of those things and you have the financial security and safety of a home to do any of those things and you can access third level university to do any of those things. But you're then making a full decision because you can do any of them, and then you either choose the ice cream van or the midwife. But you're not doing one of them because the other one is completely off bounds to you. That's
you don't even know. You don't even know about the other ones.
Yeah.
I kind of found that growing up in this community. We didn't even know all those other ones were options.
Yeah.
And one of the privileges that I have is that I could travel outside of this community, travel outside of this country and expand my understanding of the world and go, I could do whatever the fuck I want. Anything. Anything is possible. And I'm not just limited to low-income jobs with manual labour when my bleeding back is being broke that my dad had to do. You know what I mean? I can do other stuff. I can fucking do a podcast with a traveller and fall in love with him.
Be careful you don't become a traveller then, Jay. You don't get a lot of choices.
Yeah. Oh, very good, Martin.
But and you know
Probably
what?
end up collecting scrap like me.
but even if you look at over the years in terms of the travelling community, and correct me if my analysis is wrong, because I'm obviously outside looking in, but if you look at all the trades that travellers have done for so many years, they've been taken away.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
all the trades, the floors, the carpets, the back gardens, people have come in, they've pushed them out, we used to love growing up in the community where you were waiting for the travellers to come around so that you could get your new lino,
Right.
and then it's like, well, no, you can't travel anymore. No, you have to have a fixed abode to register for tax. No, you have to do this, you have to do that. And just took away the complete way of life and the
Destroyed
trades
everything.
of
That's
traveller
right.
people.
Absolutely. Stuff basically that you didn't need a big education for.
Yeah.
It was basically a day-to-day thing, like just to get by, as you said, but there was some great crafted amongst the traveller community, to be honest about, that knew how to work just probably as well as the next man. But again...
Yeah. Like, so recently there was a man that did the wooden kind of fencing in my back garden, and my ma said, I'm after getting this man, so-and-so got him as well. And I said, grand. And she said, will you send him money on Revolut? He said you can, on bank transfer or something. So she said his name, I forget what it was, say it was Dean Ruane. So then when I said, yeah, get his bank details for me, it came in and it said Patrick McDonough. And I said, all right. And I rang him. I said, are you sure you sent me the right details? It says Patrick McDonough. He says, yeah, no, I just have to say my name as that or I won't get the job first. And this is a highly skilled man doing an absolutely amazing job that I only knew he was a traveller because he had to give me his actual name to do the bank transfer. Like, that's the way people are living with their own trade.
That is the reality of it.
One of the big elephant in the room, we have an elephant in the room conversation later on at 4 o'clock, so that's why I'm bringing it up. One of the big elephant in the room conversations for me is recently we had an absolutely tragic thing happen up in Donegal. But it was like almost to the day that 7 years before we had a similar tragedy in Carrickmines where a similar amount of people perished. You know what I mean? But most of us haven't put the Carrickmines ones into our heart or into our memory. And I just think it's telling of where we are as a society. And I'm not diminishing in any way what happened in Creasley, but what happened in Carrickmines for me is as valid as the Stardust. Like, I'm getting emotional thinking about that. Imagine what walls that's building up in Martin and his people and his culture. You know what I mean? And where they are. And we slag them off because sometimes they put the fists up and they're a little bit defensive. They're shiting themselves, like, to be who they are. Everything has been blocked off for them. You know what I mean? And they haven't done it to themselves. They didn't write the legislation in 1960, whatever it was, to eliminate themselves. They didn't do that. Other people in other rooms, in boardrooms, in suits done that. What we're trying to do is unravel some of that shit. And I'm going to be honest, I'm falling in love with the ideas of his community's liberation from that bullshit.
Yeah. It's just that thing, a lot of that stuff you're talking about there in the lives of travellers, being honest about, it just becomes normal. And that's why you don't hear, I'm not saying travellers don't complain about certain things, complain about a lot of things the same as everybody else. If you have something to be fixed, try to fix it. But there's a lot of stuff that's not normal, but becomes normal. And you just live with it day to day, and that's how it is. Because no change has been made or nothing, no one wants to do anything about anything that needs fixing, basically.
Well, it's depressing.
It
It's
is.
depressing to keep asking for support and it never happening. So people just succumb then to their conditions, and that's why solutions never come as well, because people get worn down and they go, well, what's the point? You know?
But I also think it was safe. I don't know a big lot about politics or the people that makes the big decisions. I also think it genuinely degrades their intelligence. The fact that they know that there's certain things in certain areas and certain people's lives completely falling apart, and they're just willing to turn a blind eye to it. As long as their check comes in every week, I think they're happy with that.
A traveller man that me and Martin know says, Dean, after a while the walls become internal.
That's right. That's how it is. So what can I say?
And
Keep
after
on
a
living.
while, you just don't go to the pubs anymore.
Yeah, that's
You know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah. What you do is, if you're a traveller and you want to go to the pub, you bring a list with you in your pocket, yeah, of about 10 pubs, and you might just chance getting into one of them. And by chance, if you get into one of them, you're not told by 8 o'clock that this table is reserved, or there's people has this booked, or people coming in.
You can come in, but you have to leave
or
by
there's
8
a party
o'clock.
here, or whatever it might be. But again, that is reality. It has become normal, so you accept it. Simple as. I'm not saying it should be accepted, but it is accepted.
On that high note, there's a microphone over there. Any questions, please take the microphone. Take charge. Own this. Don't be afraid. Put your hand up. Just grab the mic and say something on it, please. There you go, Mikey. Hand that mic around. There's a hand up there. I can see it. Don't know. That man there, look. He has one there, look. Just forced him into it. My ma's crying. Well done, Matt. That's me, Ma. Give me Ma a round of applause for having me. You up the flats.
How are you? Can you hear me, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're grand. I'm originally from Finglas myself, from Finglas South. Yeah.
Don't turn it into a book. Just ask a question. Come on.
In the early 90s, and even still today, we've experienced an awful lot of poverty, inequality, stuff like that. In the 90s, I found it was much more equal because everyone had nothing, but yet we were a community. We helped each other out.
Right.
You know, with food and minding each other's kids. I don't think that exists today. And I think, therefore, we're obviously less equal because everyone seems to compete with each other over
Divide and conquer.
Exactly. And that's why I was so pleased with the conversation you had today, because it really emphasised that we're in a community.
While we were all poor and we had nothing and we were happy, Charlie Hottie and his mates were minted. Yeah, and they were asking my dad to tighten up his belt while he was pulling his yacht into bleeding Malahide. So we weren't all poor. Some of us just didn't know there was another fucking game in town.
But I think on that point, in terms of in communities, how whatever about people that had something, you were more talking about even within the community, how even if, so say in my community, like my parents worked, but I seen the struggle of, say, my next door neighbour. So you had some differences in the 90s within communities, but we were all much equal that we didn't know, we didn't really look at each other any different.
Exactly.
But I think that's, in some level, that's also policy now. If you look at housing policy, like if you look at women asking to be housed in or near their own community, so they have those type of supports, they're told, oh my God, you can't choose where you live. Did you not need a home? What do you mean you won't take one? You won't take it even though it's an hour away from all your supports. So actually housing policy has disrupted that ability for us to be able to all still continue to live together, look after each other, collect, being able to have your friend, will you collect my child from the school today because I have a dentist appointment, I'll collect yours tomorrow. And that's becoming more and more impossible because women mostly are being absolutely shamed to bits for refusing housing that is miles away from their support networks. Yes. So they're disrupting support networks.
I think there's one good thing about being poor anyway, and as a fellow would say, living in poverty, is that when the country goes into a crash or a lockdown or a recession, a recession. It doesn't affect the poverty people or the poor people because we're still drinking the same cup of tea, we're eating the same slice of bread, but the people that's getting the big pays, they're asked to cut their checks and they can't handle it.
Yeah, and
so in a sense, we're still living at the same level. I think so anyway, and so nothing has changed.
And sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's a bit of a myth as well, because wealthy people will remain wealthy people, and during COVID,
they will, but they can't handle
the wealthiest people in the world became even wealthier.
They can't handle the fact that, like, these big, what's called the big high-paid lads, they can't handle the fact that they've been asked to take a cut in their jobs, where if you're poor, simple as that.
Yeah, there's no
effect.
On that level.
There is effect, but you're used to it.
We're not going up in order to come down. We're just here. Shawnee Kinsella, I'm going to hand you the mic, and you're going to have a question, comment, or whatever. So Shawnee Kinsella is one of the most amazing products of Ballymun ever. Okay, we're 50 years old. We're 50 years old this year. Shawnee's about 42. And he was the poster child for homelessness, prison, crack, addiction. And now he's the poster child for Peter McFerry for love and energy and enthusiasm and meditation and all that type of stuff. Come on, Shawnee.
Thanks for that amazing introduction, Dino.
I love the moustache, by the way.
Cheers.
Movember,
yeah. I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And like Lynn, I'm quite sad listening to it at different parts of it, you know, and listening to Martin and listening to everybody, I suppose, talking about the divide that is, you know, our reality, you know, my reality anyway. And for me, the Ballymun Health and Fitness Festival, the Ballymun Summit, the Traveller and a Countryman, the love, the joy, the positive energy, all of that stuff has reinvented my life. And my life now is all about like reinventing me as an ex-crack addict, an ex-homeless person that lived on the street, an ex-prisoner, an ex-bleeding down and out, if you like, you know, one of them people on the side of the road that the state or the world said he's never going to make anything of himself. He's just a worthless piece of shit. And I had to build my life up. And through building my life up, I've got to a place now where I can start to process a lifetime of trauma. And while doing that, I'm trying to create ideas in my head for people that are like me. So all of my friends, half of them are dead, the other half are in prison, and the other half are actively using heroin and crack as we speak. So my job is to show them love and not to expect anything back from them, but to just show them, here's a picture of what it can be like, and I'm going to show you that. And like you, I get knocked back at times and I get disillusioned with where I'm going, and I get lonely and I get upset with myself, and I question, you know, am I doing the right thing, and do people like me, and, you know, all of that stuff. So that doesn't go away, but I feel amazing. I love Ballymun. I love this community. I love all the guys that are a part of the Ballymun Summit, but more than that, I think the interesting thing for me is the people that haven't yet found their voice.
Yes. Martin said to me a few weeks ago, he said, where do you think this is going? And what do you think we should do? And should we listen to the audience and all this type of stuff? And should we pander to, you know, people? And because sometimes you could get on all the amazing guests and have all the crack, but sometimes you miss that stuff. And so my response to him was, have courage, take a risk, be honest, be vulnerable, open your heart. And the sixth one is, be kind to yourself.
Yeah. And I think I'd just like to say just one sentence. I was thinking, Shani, when you were saying that time about X this, X that, right? All those things. And I was just reminded of, I done a podcast in the prisons called Conversations on the Margins with the lads in the prison. And on the very last episode, I gave him a fake name. So I'm going to say no name now because I forget all their fake names. On the very last episode, he said to his mother, see, like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but like, I've really, really changed. I'm a good person now. I'm this and I'm that. And she just said, no, son, stop. She said, you are now who you are always meant to be. It was that period of time where you went yourself. So you weren't an ex anything. You're actually just now who you were always meant to be. You know, that's it. Yeah.
So me and Shani and Martin talked on the podcast. Go check out the episodes, and it's called Shawnee Kinsley, because he played the role of Shawnee or Whacker or Orlando or Stabby for fucking years until he fell in love with Sean, and he found Sean at the bottom of whatever the fuck it was. You know what I mean? A crack vial or whatever. You know what I mean? Eventually you hit solid ground and you can fucking push up off it. Go, Bernie. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm from Finglas as well. My name is Bernie Hughes. You know, obviously, Lynn, you're been sort of one of the only working class woman, along with Eileen as well. You know, and coming from two similar but different, totally different experiences of poverty and growing up. But the thing that I would say is that we, in our communities, both all our working class communities, I mean, we've seen people stand up and fight right back from the days of 72 during the tax marches and everything else, when hundreds of thousands of working class people stood on the streets. We are in the majority, right, in our communities, in the country, ordinary people that are on terrible wages for a job they do. And whether you're a sweeper on the street or cleaning a Jack's or running a company, we all need a certain standard of living to be able to afford to live a fair enough life, maybe to get a holiday every year or two with kids and whatever. And they're not luxuries. In this day and age, they're not luxuries. So, I mean, the young people that we have, plenty of young people here today. And I'd just like to say to you to catch up as well on something I think one of you said. The right are really trying to go after our young people. They're coming into the communities and they are saying to you, I understand what that said, but their ulterior motive is to get you involved in to become little racists and to accept the Hitler ideology. And we can't let that happen. It's happening all over Europe. If you want a country that you can be proud of and that you can bring your children up with a fair living and whatever, it is down to you. Since the age of 15, I've been trying to work within my community. I'm 65 next year. So I've seen changes, but it breaks my heart because the working class, the people that I live with all my life, are saying now they're waking up a little bit, but you need to wake up in greater numbers. Our young people need to get involved with their communities here. And I know it sounds like maybe a bit of a talk down to us, but it's not meant like that. I'm pleading with you, get involved in your community. Your community is good, if not better, than most of them out there. But it lies with you. We need you to go and educate yourselves politically as well, because we need people that are going to be have direct action, and we need that. We need people like Lynn in the Senate and in the Dáil, and we need people that are going to stand out beside them or in our council offices or wherever it is, not just one day, but every day until we get what we want.
Thank you,
that
Bernie.
is the only way.
Thank you, Bernie. Well done. And for the 17-year-old young one listening to that, she's going, who's that fucking mad Elvin talking about? I didn't do this. All I want to do is big yokes of gas. I find them big yokes of gas bleeding everywhere. They're like bumper packs of gas. That's what your kids are on. Your kids are on TikTok. They're doing bleeding bumps of cocaine with versatile and they're on gas. Yup, welcome to Ireland. Michael, are you going to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say something. It's absolutely amazing what Martin's doing for his community. And I done a project there not too long ago. It was a workshop called Collective Film. It's like a collective film. And there was these young travellers that came and said, do you want to do something to be advocates for the next generation of travellers? My family are very ingrained within the traveller community, being in the boxing clubs. And when my brother was in trouble, the travellers actually brought me in when nobody else would in Blanchardstown. When he was in trouble with the guards, they were looking out for him. And I think it's a very positive image what you're putting across. And as a human advocate and a human rights kind of person that I promote in music, it's nice to see that the traveller community is starting to build this foundation where travellers are being proud of themselves. And what we were trying to promote in the music with the Working Class Records, Lunatic, and all the rest of them. And then what you're doing as well is that it's giving a voice to travellers that seemed like they didn't have a voice before, and now they're being listened. So it's really appreciative of what you're doing, and I just wanted to put that across to you.
Michael Peel, that was amazing. And there's some young travellers here as well, some older travellers as well, but there's some travellers in this room. This is Martin's first time, other than a couple of weeks ago when him and his mammy received the Spirit of the Community Award. It's his first time in this theatre. It's his first time doing a live podcast. It's his first time on this stage. Let's make sure that doesn't continue on. Let's make sure that we just get rid of those differences in our own heads and hearts, okay? That's why I think I'm doing the podcast, is just to develop that relationship. I've been lazy in my life and ignoring the fact that we have this wonderful thing in Ireland called Travellers, and recently I fell in love with them again. You know, it's beautiful. Thank you very much. I'm going to give the last word to you, Martin.
I don't know, I just want to say thanks to everybody for the great compliments there for starters. And yes, it's nice to see everybody treating everybody as we would like to be treated ourselves. Just simply be equal, and why not? There should be no other way. And thanks to everybody again.
That's it. The first live podcast of Traveller and the Countryman with our stunning guest, Senator Lynn Ruane. A beautiful audience in Ballymun, the Ballymun Summit. Thanks to all the young people from Trinity Comprehensive School. Give yourself a round of applause. Yuppa!
It's for life, isn't it?
So that's us for this episode, a Traveller and a Countryman podcast. If you like it, let us know, share it around, and we'll see you on the road.